Hello everyone, I am Kenshin. Welcome to Talking About History. We all know that passwords are effective as secret messaging, but they are also very dangerous if they are cracked. This time we take a look at 8 cryptographic events that shaped history. Before the show starts, please subscribe, like, and turn on the little bell. If possible, leave your thoughts. This will help the growth of the show. Without further ado, let's officially start. 8. Citadel. Alright. Imagine this. Back in the day, the Spartans, the buff, no-nonsense warriors you've probably seen in movies, had this nifty trick up their bronze sleeves for keeping their text messages secret. They didn't have WhatsApp or Snapchat, but they did have the Citadel, which was basically the ancient Greek version of encrypted messaging. So here's how it worked. They took this wooden stick, right? Let's call it the Citadel. They would grab a piece of parchment, think of it as old-school paper, and write a message on it. But here's the twist. They would wrap this parchment around the Citadel, kind of like winding tape around a baton. When you unwrapped the parchment, the writing looked like absolute gibberish. But, if you had another Citadel with the exact same thickness and wrapped the parchment back around it, voila, you could read the message clear as day. Plutarch, this old-timey writer from way back when, tells us that the Spartans were pretty clever about it. They made 2 identical citadels, kept one, and handed the other to their messenger. If they needed to send a top-secret note, they'd scribble it down, wrap it around their stick, and send it off. The messenger, on the other end, would wrap it around the matching citadel and read the hidden message. But, like any old-school tech, it had its hacks. If someone else figured out the trick, basically, the diameter of the citadel, you could crack the code. Plus, it wasn't great for long messages because, well, you'd need a really long stick, and that's just impractical. And there you have it, the Spartan secret messaging app, ancient style. 7. Caesar cipher. Let's dive back into history to a time when secret messages were the norm, but WhatsApp was millennia away from being invented. Enter Julius Caesar, the OG of cryptic messaging. This guy didn't just conquer lands. He was also dual-wielding as a cryptographer with what we now call the Caesar cipher. Imagine texting your friends, but instead of emojis, you shift each letter by 3 spaces. So, hey becomes KHB. Confusing, right? That was the point. Caesar was out there in Gaul, which is basically a huge chunk of Western Europe, doing his general thing, winning battles, expanding Rome's borders, and writing to his buddies back home. But he had a problem. He needed his messages to be secret. So, he came up with a brainy scheme. Instead of sending an A, he'd send A, D. B would become E, and so on. Essentially, he created a secret code by shifting letters around. The gossip columnist of ancient Rome, Suetonius, tells us that Caesar loved mixing up his letters in a way that would leave anyone scratching their heads unless they knew to shift the alphabet by 4 letters to crack the code. In one of his famous bouts of secret communication, when Caesar was laying out his military genius in the Gallic Wars, he needed to get a message to Cicero, who was basically under siege. Here's where it gets Hollywood. Caesar writes the letter in Greek, not the usual Latin, thinking, hey, if this gets caught, at least they won't understand it. Then, because why not, he ties this letter to a spear and chucks it into Cicero's camp. The spear with the secret letter then played hide and seek in a tower for 2 whole days before someone found it. Talk about express delivery, Caesar style. 6. Freemason cipher, pigpen cipher. Alright. Picture this. It's the 18th century and the Freemasons, who are kind of like the secret society of the cool kids club, are passing notes in class. But instead of scribbled ink, they've got this nifty little thing called the pigpen cipher, which is basically the James Bond gadget of ancient handwriting. So instead of taking a letter and swapping it with another, like our friend Caesar did, these guys made a grid, something like a hashtag or a tic-tac-toe board. Each letter of the alphabet was assigned its own little section of the grid. Then, they'd draw some parts of the grid with some dots here and there to stand for each letter. They were playing dots and boxes with their alphabet soup. It's also got a few aliases, kind of like how a spy would. Some folks call it the Masonic cipher because the Freemasons rocked it like a badge of honor. Other names include the Napoleon cipher, yes, that Napoleon, and the cheeky tic-tac-toe cipher because, well, it looks like you could play a game on it. By the time the 18th century rolled around, this cipher was pretty much the Freemasons' handshake in ink form. They loved it so much that it got its VIP name, the Freemason cipher. And just like bell-bottoms and vinyl, this cipher had quite the heyday for a couple of centuries. It's like the OG of encrypted texts, making sure your secret stays as safe as your granny's recipe for apple pie. 5. Great Cipher of Louis XIV. Once upon a time, in the land of flamboyant wigs and decadent palaces, a father-son duo named Antoine and Bonaventure Rossignol came up with something so ingenious that it would leave Louis XIV's most secret whispers safe and sound for 200 years. This wasn't your average run-of-the-mill secret language. Oh no, this was the Great Cipher, the Da Vinci Code of the 17th century. Back in the day, folks had ciphers that were as simple as A is 1, B is 2. Easy peasy, right? Well, the Rossignols looked at this and went, hold my quill, because they had bigger plans. They created a cipher so mind-bendingly complex it used not 26, but 587 different numbers to represent the rich bouillabaisse of French syllables. But wait, there's more. Just when you thought you might be getting the hang of it, they threw in a curveball. Some of these numbers were actually secret instructions to delete letters. Imagine playing a game of secret messages where half the rules are hidden. Now, Louis XIV, known as the Sun King because he basically thought he was the center of the universe, was all over this. He used the Great Cipher to send his most top-secret political gossip without fearing the prying eyes of nosy neighbors. Enter stage left, Etienne Bézries, a cryptanalyst with a flair for puzzles. After much head-scratching, paper shuffling, and candle burning, Bézries did the unthinkable. He cracked the code. Among the juicy tidbits he unearthed was a message hinting at the possible identity of the man in the iron mask. You know, the mysterious prisoner who wore a mask and fueled centuries of speculation and Hollywood movies. Yeah, that guy. Thanks to the Great Cipher, he remained one of history's best-kept secrets, until Bézries threw a wrench in all that mystique. 4. The Jefferson Wheel Cipher. Let's take a stroll down the memory lane to the era of the American Revolution, where whispers of liberty were encrypted as much as they were spoken. Picture the likes of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, and James Monroe, the VIP club of the Founding Fathers. These gents were conjuring up a nation over whispered conversations and letters that had more twists and turns than a country back road. But here's where it gets cool. Thomas Jefferson wasn't just penning the Declaration of Independence, he was the Steve Jobs of secret messages. While gallivanting around Paris as the American ambassador, Jefferson got wind of Europe's black chambers. Sounds sinister, right? Well, these were the secret offices where all the king's horses and all the king's men would steam open your letters, have a read, smile at your secrets, and put them back in the post like nothing ever happened. Jefferson thought, not on my watch, and did a little inventing. He came up with the Jefferson Wheel Cipher, which looked more like a baker's rolling pin than a tool of spycraft. It was this fancy stick with 36 wooden discs, each with a scramble of the alphabet like alphabet soup gone wild, all lined up on a metal axle. Jefferson was so amped about his invention that he slid into U.S. Ambassador Robert R. Livingston's DMs in 1802 with a message that basically said, "Buddy, I've got a cipher that's a tough cookie to crack, but once you get it, it's easy peasy lemon squeezy." And for Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark fame, Jefferson handed out a nifty square table cipher in 1803 to safeguard the precious deets of uncharted American landscape bought in the Louisiana Purchase. 3. Morse code. Imagine you're kicking it in the early 19th century. Your fastest mailman is a guy on a horse, and then boom. Along comes the telegraph, this absolute game-changer that lets you zap messages across vast distances faster than you can run down the street. And who do we have to thank for this wizardry? Our man Samuel Morse, the American inventor with a knack for dots and dashes. Morse hatched this brainchild called Morse code, a clever little system where he swapped out the alphabet soup for a tidy menu of beeps and pauses. Think of it like the original text message, just without the emojis. You'd drop by the telegraph station, hand over a note, and the clerk would get down to business, tapping out your words in this binary ballet of short and long signals. So off your message would speed along wires strung up like spider webs across the country until it hit the next station. There, another clerk would wiggle his eyebrows, interpret the Morse mambo and write it down for the person at the other end. Voila! Message delivered at lightning speed, quite literally. But here's the kicker, highlighted by a sharp writer in the English Quarterly Review back in 1853, secrets. Fuffedabudit. Sending a private love note or a sneaky business deal through the telegraph meant that you, my friend, had an audience. That's right. Every tap and pause got served up on a platter to at least half a dozen telegraph folks before it ever reached the intended peepers. 2. The Enigma Code. Step right up, folks, and take a gander at the Enigma machine, the metal beast that looks like your grandma's old typewriter, but hit way above its weight class in World War II. This bad boy was the brainchild of Arthur Scherbius, a dude tinkering away in 1918 who thought, hey, let's keep business secrets on the down low. Little did he know, his contraption would become the ultimate whisper network for the Nazis. The Enigma was like the Fort Knox of word scramble. It packed a punch that could turn a regular, how do you do, into an indecipherable mishmash of characters. You see, whenever a German officer punched a letter, the Enigma would work its magic, zing, and out came a letter so secret, even James Bond would scratch his head. But wait, there's more. This thing was no one-trick pony. It had scrambler discs, 26 notches each, spinning around like a carousel at a county fair, and by 38, they slapped a fifth disc on there, just for kicks. Every day, when the cock crowed, the Germans turned their dials, matched up their secret settings from the day codes, and like two kids with walkie-talkies, they were in biz. Now, imagine you're the Allies getting these coded convos. Talk about a needle in a haystack. We're talking about over 150 quintillion combinations. That's more stars than in the clear night sky. The Enigma was like keeping your diary in a vault, inside a maze, on another planet, in a different galaxy. 8. Navajo Code Talkers. Alright. Picture this. World War II is kicking into high gear, and Uncle Sam's hustling to keep messages from falling into the wrong hands. So the Marine Corps, with a stroke of genius, plays a card no one saw coming. They dive into the deep well of the Navajo language, rich and intricate, with nary a written word to its name. Enter the Navajo Code Talkers, a squad of 29 hand-picked Navajo fellas who spun a web of words so intricate, it left the enemy scratching their heads. These guys weren't just linguists. They were linguistic gymnasts, flipping and twisting their mother tongue into a code that chiseled its name into the annals of cryptology. Now, these code talkers were the real deal, strapping on their boots for every Pacific kerfuffle the Marines waded into, from the beaches to the bush. They scored big at places like Iwo Jima, spinning their uncrackable code like cotton candy, sweet and light, but tough as nails. The Japanese intelligence, bless their hearts, they cracked the Air Force's codes like walnuts, but when it came to the Navajo tune, they couldn't hum a single bar. That code was a vault within a vault, a secret so well kept, it stayed hush-hush long after the war ended, not busting into the daylight until '68. So there you have it, a lineage of code-slinging, language-wielding heroes, giving America the upper hand with nothing but the tongues they were born with. That, my friends, is how you turn a language into a legendary cipher.